kill. Although Luke didn't participate in significant arson, he had a fascination with fire as a child. He loved watching candles flicker and would play with the flames. He got a thrill out of burning action figure toys. He became excited lighting matches and watching them burn out. He enjoyed destroying things the way he felt he was being destroyed every day. You may think these activities are innocent and normal, but Luke's underlying motive was definitely questionable. He had a scary desire for destructive power that one day he would use to massacre innocent people. Luke's history shows two of the three elements of the homicidal triad, also known as the homicidal triangle or the psychopathological triad, a combination of three childhood behaviors that many murderers, especially serial killers, exhibit in their early years. These include enuresis, bedwetting, pyromania, setting fires, and animal torture. Expert criminologists and mental health physicians view this combination as a major danger signal in a young person's life. J.M. MacDonald first described the homicidal triad in his article, The Threat to Kill, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and it is sometimes referred to as the MacDonald triad. Luke did not experience bedwetting, but to his recollection, he did engage in the other two behaviors. John Douglas, former chief of the FBI's Investigative Support Unit and an author who has interviewed hundreds of serial killers, indicated that not every boy who displays these traits is going to grow up to be a killer, but the combination of the three was so prominent in our study subjects that we began recommending that a pattern, rather than isolated incidences, of any two of them should raise a warning flag for parents and teachers. Douglas added that if a person displays two of the three traits, he or she has the beginnings of a sociopathic behavior that isn't likely to correct itself on its own. This is unlikely to be a phase. One of my favorite crime writers and criminal profilers, Pat Brown, explained the homicidal triad in her book, Killing for Sport. When children feel like they have no control over their environment, behavioral problems tend to crop up. As they struggle to gain some kind of power over their lives and others in it, they often resort to antisocial behaviors. An 8-year-old Mike DeBardelabin would have been hard-pressed to arrange an appointment with a realtor at a vacant house as a prospective homebuyer, setting up his ruse to rape and kill, but he sure as heck could set the neighbor's tool shed on fire. Teen killer Todd Rizzo's story best illustrates the homicidal triad. In 1997, Todd was an 18-year-old young man living in Connecticut, who as a child often dreamed of becoming a serial killer. When he finally decided it was time to kill, he lured a 13-year-old boy into the woods behind his house with the promise of looking for snakes. When the boy wasn't looking, Todd hit him over the head with a sledgehammer 13 times while the victim tearfully begged for his life. Todd, an articulate and well-spoken man, now seems genuinely remorseful for his actions. He shared with me his thoughts about his personal triad experience. It bothers me to admit that there is such a thing as tormenting animals, setting fires and wetting the bed, used by law enforcement to profile would-be serial killers. It also bothers me that I am guilty of all three. As much as I loved all the pets we had, I often hurt them, but always apologized and consoled them afterwards, if that makes any sense. I've whipped my dog for no good reason and choked my cats. I also put them in the microwave and freezer, and touched a match to their whiskers. My pet rats were tormented worst. I set small fires, not arson range, mind you, just blazes in the basement or backyard, basically to watch certain toys burn and melt. I'd light a piece of paper, amazed at the char and curl. 2 times only did I set dangerous fires, but still not arson range. I wet the bed from birth to about the 10th grade. This latter part I'm most ashamed of. I know it was out of my control, but sometimes I let it happen when I could easily have up and walked to the toilet. Bedwetting handicapped my childhood. I think my bladder was the arch-bully of my past. On top of all three admissions, I grew up dreaming of being a serial killer. Jeffrey Dahmer was my idol. Enuresis, bedwetting. About 5 to 7 million kids in America wet the bed. Bedwetting is most common in children in preschool and under the age of 7. Harold Schechter, a prolific author of true crime books and professor of American literature and culture at Queens College, suggested that if this habit persists beyond the age of 12, it might signify a deeper pathology. The FBI reported that 60% of sexually related murderers and serial killers suffered with bedwetting in their adolescent years. While many teen killers and those who have committed violent crimes have struggled with bedwetting, many of them are too embarrassed to talk about it, let alone admit to it. Arthur Shawcross, known as the Genesee River Killer, was a cannibal killer who murdered a total of 13 people, including prostitutes, friends, and children. He conducted his murderous rampage in upstate New York from 1988 through 1990. Shawcross had a very cruel and awful upbringing. This persistent bedwetter allegedly was molested by an aunt, sodomized with a broom handle by his mother, and raped while in grade school. Though relatively unknown, Shawcross committed some of the most unspeakable crimes against corpses and farm animals. In an interview, Shawcross recounted the murder of a family friend and said, "I was one sick person." Shawcross has since died in prison from natural causes. Alton Coleman wet his pants so much that his friends nicknamed him Pissy. In 1984, he went on a 6-state killing spree and murdered 8 people ranging in ages from 7 to 77. Coleman's methods of murder included shooting, stabbing, and strangulation. He committed other crimes, including rape and armed robbery. He was executed in 2002. 16-year-old Joseph Willie, while drunk, participated in homosexual sex with a friend. Humiliated by the situation when he regained sobriety, he decided the only thing that would make him feel right was to kill his friend. Joseph revealed some specifics of the crime to me. I came up behind Eddie and stabbed him in the back. He jumped up and turned around, and when he did, I stabbed him again in the stomach. We both fell and I held him down until he stopped moving. I actually felt satisfaction, like this was the answer to all of my problems and anger. I actually felt more alive than ever. Joseph told me, I did wet the bed growing up until I was about 12. He also said that he was always game for hurting others, and was about 10 years old when he thought about burning down his house while his family was inside. Pyromania, setting fires. Many children, teenagers, and young adults are intrigued or fascinated with fire. Young kids especially are frequently caught playing with matches, lighters, or stoves. While often this behavior can be linked to simple curiosity or mischief, a growing obsession with fire can lead to violent and destructive conduct. Pyromania is an interesting phenomenon. The fire starter performs this injurious misdeed as an act of revenge or destruction, and it also allows the fire starter to have control over or manipulate the police and other rescue personnel. Setting fires can also be considered a sexual crime because it allows the criminal to undergo a sexual rush, similar to what a sexual offender feels when he rapes his victims. Harold Schechter said, "Serial murderers who enjoy starting fires do so for the same reason they love to torture and kill. It turns them on. Since most serial killers don't think of humans as more than objects, it's an easy jump from setting fires to killing people." One of the first FBI criminal profilers, John Douglas, exposed another facet to arson. Arson is often an attempt to gain control and power and attain a feeling of success in their lives. Look at the people an arsonist gets to manipulate and control: the victims of the fire, firefighters, police, and other figures of authority, the media, and even the community in general. In 1976, David, son of Sam Berkowitz, tyrannized the Bronx area of New York at night. During the day, he sorted letters at a United States post office. When he was younger, Berkowitz's friends called him Pyro due to his fondness for setting fires. He is reported to have started more than 2,000 fires throughout the state. Berkowitz's writings revealed he would start them in trash cans or vacant lots, mostly in Queens and Brooklyn, and then watch as fire departments frantically responded to the calls. Berkowitz began his wave of murder in 1976 and targeted young women with dark hair. Many of his victims were shot as they sat in parked cars with their boyfriends. Berkowitz bragged to authorities, "I only shot pretty girls." By the time he was arrested, 6 people were dead and several others were critically and permanently injured. David told me exclusively that he believes that Satanism and the occult were the reasons for his crime spree. But there were signs of trouble ahead when he was a youngster. He used to hide in dark closets or under a bed for hours when he was a small child. He also participated in a large amount of vandalism, which included arson. And he had an early fascination with the occult. The murders occurred when he was involved in a devil-worshipping group in New York. He also told me there were no dogs speaking to him, but instead that was a story made up by his legal team. The Sam in The Son of Sam, he told police, was about Samhain, the god of the Druids, who demanded human sacrifices. I was at one time a devil worshipper. I made the mistake of getting involved with a group of people who were into witchcraft. I also had a hard time growing up, and for whatever reason, I was not truly able to open up to my adoptive parents. I was unable to express my anger and other emotions in constructive ways. I was fascinated with movies and stories with occult themes, and I read the Satanic Bible. Since I was a child, I had a craving for darkness. I have no interest in these things anymore. I have been a Christian now for 29 years, and my life changed for good in 1987. Since his conviction and while in prison, Berkowitz has become a born-again Christian and changed his grisly nickname to Son of Hope. He has accepted the fact that he will spend the rest of his days behind bars. Now Berkowitz spends his time studying the Bible and helping other inmates deal with physical challenges. Another serial killer, Carlton Gary, burned down a grocery store as a teenager. Known as the Stocking Strangler, Gary killed older white women, at least 8 in total during the 1970s. He was convicted of 3 of these murders and sentenced to death in a Georgia prison. Gary, known for his charm, was so slick that he even dated a deputy sheriff while he was selling drugs and murdering women. The following are other serial killers associated with a fascination with fire. New Jersey serial killer Joseph Callinger wrote, "I love the excitement of the power fire gives me. The mental image is greater than sex." Arthur Shawcross started a string of fires, one of which blazed at the paper factory where he worked and resulted in more than $250,000 in damage. Thrill killer George Adorno set his sister on fire when he was only 4 years old. At the age of 11, Carl Panzeram caused more than $100,000 in damage when he set fire to a reformatory he was locked up in. In 1997, in New Jersey, 18-year-old Thomas Koskovich, along with a 17-year-old accomplice, ordered a pizza. When the delivery guy came to the door, they shot the man to death. While Thomas repeatedly denied he was the shooter, investigators pointed to his guilt and also ascribed him as a thrill killer. In our interview, Thomas chronicled his fascination with fire. "I did play with fire a little bit. I set a trailer in my backyard on fire, pretending I was a fireman and was going to put it out. But I couldn't, and the fire department was called. I would build small houses for action figures, then light them on fire and try to rescue them." Rod Matthews, who beat a 15-year-old boy to death with a baseball bat in 1986 and took friends to see the corpse after the crime, admitted his obsession with fire to police. Another teen killer I interviewed, Dale Stewart, told me about his interest in fire as a child. Dale, who shot and killed a boy riding on a bicycle in Minnesota, said, "The only thing I did was play with fire. I would set plastic and paper on fire and watch it burn. I remember one time I was playing with matches and set the carpet in my room on fire." Austin Addison, the New York teen who shot and killed another teen over his jacket, informed me that he took great pleasure out of seeing and setting fires. Animal torture. There is a curious form of animal torture that some of you reading this book probably exercised as a child. These are things like removing the wings of a fly, plucking off the legs of a spider, burning an insect on the sidewalk using a magnifying glass, or poking, prodding, and jabbing the family pet. Relatively harmless, right? Well, I agree. But we must use the same level of caution and awareness as with the former activities of bedwetting and playing with fire. Animal torture can become more than just playful behavior. It can become vicious, perverse, and deadly. A child who severely tortures or has sex with an animal, otherwise known as bestiality, is exhibiting serious signs of psychological, mental, and emotional problems. Harold Schechter differentiated between the simple curiosities of children and more troubling behavior. Lots of little boys who enjoy pulling the wings off of flies grow up to be lawyers or dentists. The sadistic behavior of budding serial killers is something else entirely. After all, it's one thing to chop an earthworm in two because you want to watch the separate halves squirm. It's quite another to eviscerate your neighbor's pet kitten because you enjoy listening to its agonized howls. ASPCA therapist Dr. Stephanie Lafarge said, "Anyone who hurts animals has the potential to move on to people." Most experts agree that animal sadism usually doesn't stop at animals. Many young people who act out this type of torture graduate from animals to human beings. In his book, The Serial Killer Files, Schechter similarly warned that animal torture isn't a stage, but a rehearsal for future murderous acts on human beings. It is not unusual for serial killers to have, among other violent activities, decapitated cats, dissected dogs, and set animals on fire in their childhood. Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most famous modern-day serial killers, frequently performed operations on neighborhood cats and dogs and his goldfish pets, slashing them open to take a peek inside their bodies. He also collected roadkill and nailed live frogs to trees. Dahmer said, "I found a dog and cut it open just to see what the insides looked like. And for some reason, I thought it would be a fun prank to stick the head on a stake and set it out in the woods." British killer Dennis Nilsen hanged a cat to see how long it would take to die. Serial killer Carol Cole, also known as the barfly strangler, used to choke the family dog unconscious. Murderers such as serial killer Peter Curtin regularly raped and killed animals. Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, trapped animals and shot them with a bow and arrow. Joseph Olicio from Old Forge, Pennsylvania, was known around his community to abuse animals. In 1981, 15-year-old Joseph shot and killed two neighborhood children, ages 4 and 8, with a 12-gauge shotgun. He dumped their bodies in an abandoned mining pit. In the courtroom, when he was convicted at the end of his trial, Joseph turned to his family, raised a clenched fist, and advised it was party time. Luis Ramon was another 15-year-old boy who participated in animal torture. This Tennessee young man killed his aunt with a butcher knife while wearing a hockey mask, a similar prop used by the main character Jason in Friday the 13th. In prison, Luis said that he thought his mission on Earth was to be a serial killer, and he therefore made a commitment to kill as many people as he possibly could. He told me that he set fires and killed animals growing up. Jim Hardy and Pete Rowland were two teenagers who took part in the murder of a 19-year-old man in Missouri. They beat him to death with baseball bats, and when the barely alive victim pleaded for a reason for the beating, the two killers said it was fun. They then disposed of the dead body in a well. Jim and Pete were involved in Satanism, loved to listen to death metal music, and tortured animals while growing up. New Jersey teen Sam Manzi had dark fantasies about raping and murdering little boys. It is reported that he engaged in animal abuse and tortured little children. Because of Sam's poor social skills, he had great difficulty making friends his own age. Consequently, he retreated in isolation to his bedroom for long hours, spending much of his time surfing the internet and conversing with strangers in online chat rooms. In 1996, Sam met a 43-year-old sexual predator, Steve Simmons, online. Their relationship eventually became sexual. Some believe the combination of this illicit affair and Sam's use of prescribed Ritalin catapulted him into acting out his violent fantasies. The following year, Sam abducted and murdered a boy who came to his door selling candy and wrapping paper for his school. Sam attempted to have sex with the child, strangled him with the cord of an alarm clock, and took photos of his body. He then stuffed his victim in a suitcase and kept it in his room until the next day, when he got rid of it in a wooded area near his home. Sam was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to 70 years in prison. In his statement of apology, his voice hauntingly echoed throughout the courtroom. "This isn't the way things should work out. I still can't figure out why I did what I did." One of the first American school shooters, Brenda Spencer, introduced in Chapter 1, had a history of animal abuse. Brothers David and Brian Freeman and their cousin Ben Birdwell, who attacked and murdered the Freeman family, had bragged to a friend about decapitating a cat and worshipping its dead body. And Rod Farrell, a self-proclaimed 500-year-old vampire named Vazago, tormented his pet cat by throwing it down the stairs, breaking its neck. When a child exhibits behaviors indicative of the homicidal triad, seek professional help immediately. These acts can represent symptoms of major underlying issues, like physical abuse, molestation, bullying, or sexual and violent thoughts. Many of our youth are struggling with problems, fears, and anxieties beyond their control. We need to pay more attention to them, guide them with love and wisdom, and teach them the priceless value of life. If a 12-year-old child is a bedwetter, it does not mean he or she will turn into the next Jeffrey Dahmer, but it should serve as a caution for parents, teachers, and role models. They should do whatever it takes to help a possibly troubled child deal with his or her problems and ultimately live an emotionally healthy, balanced, and successful life. 10. Dahmer rides the school bus. The early years of serial killers. Doing doubles is far more difficult than doing singles, but on the other hand, it also puts one in a position to have twice as much fun. Gerard John Schaefer, serial killer, talking about killing 2 teen girls at one time. In the thousands of conversations I have had throughout the years on the subject of teen killers, I am frequently asked about serial killers. It's obviously a fascinating topic for many. A serial killer is a person who kills 2 or more people, with a cooling-off period in between the homicides. The murders are usually carried out in the same fashion, and there are generally similar characteristics shared among the victims. Many times there is a sexual element to the crime. Most historians and crime buffs agree that Jack the Ripper was the first serial killer in our modern era, while the first known serial killer in America was probably H.H. Holmes, who confessed to 27 murders in the 1890s near the Chicago area. In my studies of serial killers in their early childhood and teen years, I have found some common threads. For starters, most serial killers, approximately 90% of them, are white males. Many have high IQs but did not perform academically well in school. They come from highly unstable families, were abandoned by one or both parents, and grew up in an environment where physical, mental, emotional, or sexual abuse was prevalent. 75% of serial killers come from families with a history of alcohol abuse. 50% come from families with a history of psychiatric problems, and 50% come from families with a history of sexual abuse. At an early age, serial killers take part in petty crimes, like theft or vandalism, and have an unhealthy obsession with sex, pornography, and voyeurism. Many also show signs of the homicidal triad, which includes bedwetting, fire starting, and the abuse of animals and small children. Serial killers usually have a hard time bonding with parents, are typically described as loners, and have few friends, if any. A majority of them spend an exorbitant amount of time daydreaming, and 3/4 of them have a chronic lying problem. Some serial killers have spent time in mental institutions or children's homes. Many of them have attempted suicide at least once. Would-be serial killers. In thinking about the relationship between the adult serial killer and teen killer, I have often wondered, if teen killers had not been caught and sentenced to prison, could some of them have become adult serial killers in their later years? I have also wondered, how many known adult serial killers started murdering in their teens, thereby making them teen killers early in their criminal careers? In this chapter, we will also investigate the upbringing and early lives of a few well-known serial killers and examine early warning signs that adults missed when there may still have been the possibility of getting them help. To answer the above questions, I believe that some teen killers would have become serial killers had they not been caught, because there were certain elements to their crimes that mirrored the work of adult serial killers. There are 4 factors of a crime I take into consideration when making such a determination. I will provide examples of such murders later on. Murders with a sexual connection. This type of crime demonstrates a deeper motivation for killing than other types of crimes. For instance, a revenge killing or a murder during the commission of committing another crime. This type of crime signifies a lust and fantasy-driven crime that is very dangerous and hard to stop after just one kill. A close and personal method of killing. When a person kills people he knows and chooses a violent method to kill, like using a knife versus a gun, it suggests that the killer enjoys killing and will likely do it again. Necrophilia, having sex with dead victims. This is a sure sign of a psychopath, and of a person who not only enjoys this act, but has some deeper influence driving him that will result in his killing again in order to experience this fantasy multiple times. Psychopathic behavior. Many serial killers are psychopaths, individuals who are in touch with reality but simply are not bothered by the consequences of their evil actions or concerned with the well-being of others. Their apathy and the mental disorders that are associated with psychopathic behavior will lead them to commit multiple murders. The next question is, how many serial killers started killing in their teenage years? We must keep in mind that it is impossible to know with certainty the exact number. Many of them do not make a habit of confessing to multiple murders. There are also others who brag about murders they never committed. It is challenging to sift through the details and uncover the truth. Let me share a few cases of serial killers whom I know began killing early. It is a known fact that Edmund Kemper killed as a teenager, way before he transformed into a psychotic serial killer. Kemper killed his grandmother and grandfather at the age of 15. 14-year-old Henry Lee Lucas, anxious to have his first sexual experience, strangled and buried a 17-year-old girl after she refused his sexual advances. Carol Cole, at the age of 8, drowned a boy his age at a social event near a lake. He pretended the murder was an accident. The victim teased Cole about his name, and Cole retaliated by ending the bully's life. Ted Bundy, although he had adamantly denied it, has been accused of killing in his teen years. Many experts believe that when he was 14 years old, he kidnapped an 8-year-old girl from her bed and murdered her. Let's get back to the 4 elements of a crime that evidence serial killer behavior. Let me detail some examples of teen killers who exhibited these dangerous signs and so could have ultimately evolved into a serial killer, as well as offer examples of adult serial killer crimes where these factors were evidenced. Murders with a sexual connection. Teens committing murders with a sexual connection isn't something new, and in fact, these type of crimes took place as early as the late 1800s. In 1874, Jesse Harding Pomeroy from Boston, Massachusetts, killed 2 young boys and tortured 6 others, ranging from ages 4 to 8. The victims were tied up, beaten, stabbed, and most had their throats and genitals cut with a knife. While in prison, Jesse was treated as a dangerous inmate and was kept in solitary confinement for 41 years. Another teen killer, 15-year-old Lewis Hamlin, committed a crime that mirrors the mode of operation of many of today's serial killers. In 1981, he, along with a friend, abducted 2 12-year-old girls walking through the woods in Vermont. The pair raped, stabbed, and shot both of the girls. Only one of the victims died. Lewis had a history of previous violent crimes, and he was also alleged to have sexually abused his own sister. In 1995, 15-year-old Edward O'Brien Jr., a former altar boy from Massachusetts, was convicted of killing his best friend's mother, Janet Downing, by stabbing her nearly 100 times. He is alleged to have spied on her undressing from across the street. Police were led to believe that the crime was sexually motivated. Investigators who pieced together the details of the crime said that Edward waited until Janet was alone and asleep on her couch, and then he attacked her with the knife. During the crime, he undressed and redressed her corpse. A serial killer who killed with a sexual connection was Illinois' John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, who killed in the Chicago area during the 1970s. As an adult, he entertained children in the neighborhood, dressed up as a clown. He called himself Pogo the Clown. He murdered a total of 33 boys, 27 of whom he had buried underneath his house in a crawl space. Gacy was a middle child who attended Catholic schools growing up and was active in the Boy Scouts as an adult volunteer. His alcoholic father was abusive and described his son as a sissy. When Gacy was 16, doctors discovered a blood clot in his brain that was caused by a severe blow to the head a few years earlier. He suffered from frequent blackouts as a result of the crushing blow. Gacy got married at the age of 21, and in that same year had his first homosexual encounter. He was arrested and convicted of child molestation at the age of 26 and began his killing spree 4 years later. William Bonin, known as the Freeway Killer, murdered between 21 and 36 victims in California during the late 70s and early 80s. He cruised around in his van, sometimes with an accomplice, and picked up young male prostitutes or hitchhikers. These young men were abducted, raped, and then were brutally strangled to death. Bonin's youngest victim was only 12 years old. Born in Connecticut to an alcoholic and gambling father and a mother who constantly ran away, Bonin was raised for the most part by his grandparents. His grandfather was a convicted child molester. At the age of 8, Bonin started carrying out various crimes, like stealing license plates. As the years passed by, he ended up serving a sentence in the juvenile detention center and was raped there by older boys. He moved back in with his mother when he was released in his teens and soon after began molesting younger children. At the age of 23, Bonin was sent to prison for sexually assaulting a young boy. Almost in the same breath, he was released and sent back again for raping a 14-year-old boy. After he completed his sentence, he made a vow to his friends that it was the last time he would ever be behind bars. Bonin decided the only way to prevent returning to prison was to kill his future victims. Bonin showed no remorse when captured and told reporters that he simply couldn't stop killing. In 1996, he was executed by lethal injection. A close and personal method of killing. When a killer chooses a more personal and up-close method of murder, it signifies a different type of killer. Many of the killers in this category kill with a knife, rope, tire iron, or even their bare hands, as opposed to using a gun or setting a fire, which is a more distant and less intimate way to kill another person. One particular crime involved 4 teenage girls in Indiana. It truly stunned me when I first came across it in the course of my research. The 2 ringleaders of the group, 17-year-old Lori Tackett and 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace, carried out most of the violence in this crime and definitely exhibited serial killer tendencies. In 1992, these girls kidnapped, tortured, and killed a 12-year-old girl who was an acquaintance of theirs, beating her with a tire iron, and then setting her on fire. The victim was kept alive for hours in the trunk of their car as Melinda and Laurie drove around trying to decide how to finish her off. At one point, Laurie smelled the blood on the end of the tire iron and laughed. Another teen murder in this category occurred in Alabama. 16-year-old Mark Anthony Duke and 19-year-old Brandon Samra killed 4 people in a brutal fashion. Duke first shot and killed his father in the kitchen because he wouldn't allow him to use his truck. After his father was dead, he murdered his father's girlfriend and her 2 young children. These 3 people were killed in serial killer fashion. He first shot the mother, but the gunshot wound didn't kill her. The 2 teens chased down the mother and her 2 children, who were able to lock themselves into a bathroom. They broke the door down, shot the mother in the forehead, and used a knife to cut the throats of the 2 small children. This kind of crime is much different from that of a school shooter opening fire with a handgun, and is an up-close and personal murder, much more intimate. This is a sign of possible continuing future violence. The Boston Strangler. The most popular case in crime history in which the mode of killing hints at serial murder has to be Albert DeSalvo, also known as the Boston Strangler. He spread fear throughout the city of Boston when his killing spree claimed the lives of 13 women from 1962 to 1964. After he sexually assaulted each young lady, he strangled her with an article of her clothing and knotted the noose into a bow to leave his signature. DeSalvo was born in 1931 and was the product of a nasty divorce. His alcoholic father was known for bringing home prostitutes and even engaged in sexual intercourse in front of his son. DeSalvo grew up in a poverty-stricken area and sold himself to homosexuals around the community. His first sexual experience occurred at the age of 10, which inflamed his unusual sexual appetite. This later drove him to commit murder. In the late 50s, in 2 unrelated events, the Army discharged him, and his wife left him. DeSalvo created a job where he took the measurements of young women and promised them possible modeling opportunities. He became known as the Measuring Man. Involved in petty crimes during this time, DeSalvo was eventually charged and convicted in a breaking and entering case. Upon his release from prison in 1962, he believed it was time for him to seek revenge against women. DeSalvo began his 19-month murder spree and became known as the Boston Strangler. His victims were both young and old. Some were raped, others were purposefully posed in weird sexual positions. He even robbed a couple of them after he killed them. After DeSalvo murdered his last victim, he embarked on a rape spree, during which he sexually assaulted approximately 300 women. He ended up in a maximum security prison, where he was stabbed to death by another inmate. America's most infamous serial killer. Another famous serial killer who displayed typical serial killer tendencies in his mode of murder was Theodore Robert Ted Bundy, who was responsible for the deaths of many young women in a multitude of states between 1974 and 1978. This charming killer was famous for using his good looks to lure young women on college campuses, in shopping malls, in apartment buildings, and once even in a grade school. His ideal victim was a pretty brunette who parted her hair down the middle and bore a striking resemblance to an ex-girlfriend. Bundy's former girlfriend had rejected him, and the breakup may have contributed to his violent tendencies against women. Bundy's story is fascinating because of his handsome appearance and successful image. No one suspected that this intelligent, charismatic guy was a violent, cannibalistic killer who had sex with the corpses of his victims. Bundy had several ruses that worked to lure young women into his car. Many times he wore a fake cast on his arm to make his victims feel sorry for him. Their pity prompted them to help him with whatever it was he needed. Bundy beat most of his victims unconscious, raped them, sodomized them, bit them, and strangled them. In his confession on death row, Bundy admitted to killing 30 women and decapitating at least a dozen of his victims with a hacksaw. He had kept the severed heads in his apartment for some time before disposing of them. He also confessed to visiting his victims' bodies over and over again, stating that he would lie with them for hours, apply makeup to their faces, and have sex with their decomposing bodies. Some speculate that Bundy could have killed more than 100 people. What made this intelligent, handsome, University of Washington honors graduate transform into a cannibalistic serial killer? Bundy was born in 1946 to a single mother. He never met his biological father, who was an Air Force veteran. Shortly after his birth, Bundy's mother moved them into her parents' home and falsely led her son to believe that his grandparents were his parents and that she was his sister. An incident with his aunt while he was only 3 years old was a strong indication that perturbing violent and sexual thoughts were in the making. One day his aunt woke up from a nap surrounded by knives. Toddler Bundy stood by the bed, smiling at her. When he was still a young boy, his mother married a military cook by the name of Johnny Culpepper Bundy. Ted instantly became a stepbrother to 4 siblings. His new stepfather tried to bond with him, but Bundy never allowed it. He considered his grandfather to be his role model. In a 1987 interview with Dorothy Lewis, Bundy said that his grandfather tortured animals. He beat the family dog and swung neighborhood cats by their tails. He also said that his grandfather, who was a deacon in his church, stashed a large collection of pornography in his greenhouse. Bundy and a cousin would sneak into the greenhouse for hours at a time, soaking their minds and eyes in the filth. Later, Bundy pointed to violent pornography as a major factor in his crimes. Though he was a good student at school, involved with the Boy Scouts, and even served as the president of the Methodist Youth Fellowship, Bundy had a dark side that no one knew about. It would soon completely possess his soul and cost dozens of innocent young ladies their lives. While Bundy participated in healthy extracurricular activities to hide his evil facet, his notorious compulsions were becoming more apparent. He started to shoplift with a passion, a sign many experts attribute to a budding psychopath. While on death row, Bundy described his dark side and admitted that he had been fascinated by images of sex and violence from a young age. He was executed in Old Sparky, Florida's electric chair, on January 24, 1989. The Gainesville Ripper. One of the most brutal and shocking killers of all time was serial killer Danny Rolling, or the Gainesville Ripper. who was executed in 2006, convicted of committing many horrible crimes, including the murder and mutilation of a number of young women. He admitted to 8 murders and 3 rapes, and confessed to 3 more murders days before his execution. Inspired by the movie Exorcist 3, which portrays an evil spirit with the name Gemini, Rowling created an alter ego for himself with the same name. His crimes mirrored those shown in the film. Before Rowling killed his victims, he told them his step-by-step plan as to how he would go about the murders. In one of his crimes, Rowling decapitated a young woman and placed her head on a shelf for the police to find when they arrived. He was also notorious for posing his victims post-mortem in an attempt to shock whoever found the bodies. Rowling had been mentally, physically, and emotionally abused by his father, who was a police officer and who had also abused Rowling's mother and his younger brother. Professionals testified at his murder trial that because of the tremendous amount of abuse Rowling endured during childhood, he functioned as an adult at the maturity level of a 15-year-old. He was locked up several times as a teen and a young adult for robberies he committed in Georgia. When he fled to Florida, he erupted into a serial killer and murdered college students in the town of Gainesville, Florida. I corresponded with Rowling before his execution and found him to be an incredibly sad and depressed man. He was executed on October 26, 2006. Necrophilia. Having sex with dead victims. Obviously, some will claim that when you commit necrophilia, you must be mentally ill. In my opinion, whether mental illness is present or not, it is a true sign of serial killing behavior. When teens take part in this type of crime, it usually indicates a serial killer in the making. In 1979, 17-year-old J. Kelly Pinkerton from Texas killed his neighbor, a mother of 3, by stabbing her 30 times and slitting her throat. He then had sexual intercourse with her body. Jay was caught, convicted, and sentenced to death. He was also convicted of another sexual murder in Texas, in which he raped and stabbed another woman. He died at the hands of the state by lethal injection in 1986. Another teen murder in this category took place in Alabama. It shocked even seasoned detectives and investigators and involved 2 17-year-olds. Kenneth Loggins and Trace Duncan picked up a hitchhiker, an adult female, and took her to a secluded area where they tortured and killed her. They threw bottles at her and kicked and beat her for 30 minutes until she was dead, even stepping on her neck. They then sexually molested her body, and when finished, threw her over a cliff. What makes this case even more troubling, and speaks volumes about the offenders, is that they returned to the body and stabbed it approximately 180 times. They then removed parts of her body, including her fingers and thumbs. They allegedly took bites out of parts of her body. This is a perfect example of teenagers who are on a very fast track to becoming serial killers. Many serial killers have included necrophilia in their crime sprees, including Edmund Kemper, who was known as the co-ed killer. He was a very large, intimidating man from California who murdered 9 people. He stood just 3 inches shy of 7 feet and weighed 300 pounds. Kemper earned his nickname from 6 of his victims who were co-eds. He used various methods of murder, but dismembered and had sex with most of his victims. Kemper's childhood was strange at best. His mother verbally abused him and locked him in their basement at night to protect his sisters. As a child, he tortured and killed animals, including the family cat. He also cut the heads off his sisters' dolls and acted out bizarre sexual rituals with those dolls. Kemper was eventually locked up in a state hospital and was then released to his mother's care, which proved to be a fatal mistake. Kemper murdered his mother and had sex with her corpse. Kemper said, "I have fantasies about mass murder. I make mad passionate love to their dead corpses, taking life away from them, and then having possession of everything that used to be theirs. All that would be mine. Everything." Serial killers who practiced necrophilia include Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Chase, Dennis Nilsen, Jerry Brudos, Ted Bundy, and Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Dennis Nilsen often kept dead bodies in his bed for sexual purposes for a week after he killed them. Psychopathic behavior. The fourth element of a crime that displays serial murder tendencies is psychopathic behavior. This is a personality disorder, or a psychological disorder, that leads a person to commit crimes and display actions that may seem insane or mentally ill. This person is not mentally ill and can lead a normal life and blend into society. Some people with this disorder feel like killing for no other reason than to experience the act of killing. Matthew Roy from Michigan fits into this category. In 2001, 19-year-old Matthew killed his girlfriend. He picked her up in the middle of the night and told her they were going to have some fun. In his confession, investigators related that Matthew had been thinking about committing murder for a long time. Matthew told me that he had been sexually abused by a babysitter growing up and suffered from depression and suicidal thoughts that eventually transformed into distinctive imaginings of murder. He feels terrible for what he did. Even today, he still cannot figure out why he had such a strong urge to kill another human being. Jeffrey Dahmer was a cannibal killer who got his start in Bath, Ohio, and eventually moved his crime spree to Wisconsin. One of the most infamous serial killers of our day, because of the grotesque nature of his crimes, Dahmer was responsible for the deaths of 17 males between 1978 and 1991. When he was only 14, he had fantasies about murdering men and having sex with their corpses. He was also fascinated with dead animals and rode around town with garbage bags to collect the remains of dead animals for his own private cemetery. He stripped the flesh off these animals, and one time he mounted a dog's head on a stick for fun. Dahmer was 18 years old when he committed his first murder. He picked up a hitchhiker in Bath, Ohio, and invited the man to his home to drink some beer and fool around in a sexual sense. After they had intercourse and the man got up to leave, Dahmer hit him in the head with a barbell, instantly killing him. He then decapitated the dead hitchhiker, cut off his body parts, placed them in garbage bags, and buried them in his backyard. Dahmer embarked on his Milwaukee killing spree in 1991, at the age of 31. He killed his victims, had sex with their corpses, and ate the body parts. He stashed some body parts in his house. When police officers searched his residence, they were horrified to find the heads of many of his victims in his refrigerator. Dahmer was convicted and sentenced to life in a Wisconsin prison, where another inmate killed him in a racially motivated attack. A psychopath who started very young was Carroll Edward Cole, a serial killer who murdered 16 victims in California, Nevada, and Texas. As I mentioned earlier, he made his first kill at the age of 8, when he drowned a classmate and pretended it was an accident. Cole's family life started to collapse when he was only 6 years old. In the early 40s, his father had left the family when he was drafted to serve in World War II. Cole's mother frequently engaged in drunken sex with a number of soldiers and violently beat her son so that he would not tell his father what was happening. This occurred on many occasions, and the beatings unfortunately got worse. The abuse Cole endured took a toll on him and fueled his future violent behavior. One time he blacked out and woke up under the house porch. He discovered he had strangled the family dog during his blackout. He also began to experience horrific daydreams about killing his mother, or any other female for that matter. Cole went on to kill 16 people. He picked up most of his victims at bars. He confessed to his crimes after being captured and was executed by lethal injection in 1985. It is amazing to me how depraved human beings can become, and how shocking their crimes against other human beings can be. The offenders mentioned in this chapter were born into families, as we all were, but something went terribly wrong as they grew up. Many of these serial killers were raised in very unstable families, which led them down the path to murder. I would strongly urge you to keep your eyes and ears open in your neighborhood, in your community, and even in your family. And do anything you can to help children who are being abused, or who may be living in a severely dysfunctional home. You might be able to help prevent the formation of a serial killer. 11. Columbine, Munich Style, Teen Killers Internationally. One day I want everyone to know my name, and I want to be famous. Robert Steinhauser, the Erfurt Terminator, German school shooter as told to a classmate. If you are an American and were asked to name the most deadly high school shooting, you would probably think of the 1999 Columbine massacre that killed 12 students and a teacher and wounded 24 others. I'm sure many of you would also be reminded of the 2007 Virginia Tech tragedy that left 32 people dead. But did you know that the deadliest high school shooting happened in Germany? Youth violence is more than just an American problem. It is an international epidemic. Murders carried out by the hands of young people regularly occur in many countries, even in those nations that have tight gun control laws or even ban guns completely. When teenagers are intent on killing, they will use whatever legal or illegal weapons they can get their hands on. As you read the stories in this chapter, focus your attention on the type of weapon used in the crimes. Not all of them are guns. While some people advocate tougher gun control laws, including controversial celebrities like Rosie O'Donnell and Michael Moore, and strongly suggest that guns are the main reason teenagers are turning into killers, it is not necessarily the case. The problem of teen killing runs much deeper than the dangers or accessibility of guns. Comparing murder rates with other countries is a challenging task because many of the statistics vary to a large degree from one study to the next. Research conducted by United Nations committees, however, seems to be the most reliable. According to the 7th United Nations Survey of Crime Trends and Operations of Criminal Justice Systems, below are the top 10 countries with the highest murder rates from 1998 to 2000. 1. Colombia. 2. South Africa. 3. Jamaica. 4. Venezuela. 5. Russia. 6. Mexico. 7. Estonia. 8. Latvia. 9. Lithuania. 10. Belarus. Believe it or not, the United States was ranked at the number 24 spot in this study. As far as other notable countries are concerned, France was ranked at 40, Australia at 43, Canada at 45, Spain at 48, Germany at 49, and Japan at 60. Let me share some stories of teen killers across the globe. There are some definite common similarities with American teen killers. Germany. On April 26, 2002, 19-year-old Robert Steinhauser, also known as the Erfurt Terminator, went on a blood-drenched rampage at Johann Gutenberg Gymnasium in Erfurt, Germany. Clothed in a ninja outfit and a ski mask and armed with a pistol, a pump-action shotgun, and ammunition, Robert shot and killed 13 teachers, 2 students, and a police officer, and injured 10 other people. The killing frenzy was over in about 20 minutes when the Erfurt Terminator killed himself after being locked in a classroom by a heroic teacher. Most of the victims were killed by shots to the head. Investigators suggested that his targets were intended to be only teachers or other authority figures. Robert chased one particular teacher who had tried to escape out to her car. When she tripped, he fired 3 shots to her head. The woman died instantly. Robert lived in a comfortable middle-class home with his grandparents and his mother. He was a big fan of guns and had a license to own and use them. In high school, Robert created a disturbing film. The plot detailed a main character who took revenge on a gang for killing his girlfriend. Each gang member was killed execution style with a gunshot to the head. The story concluded with the suicide of the gunman. Sounds almost exactly like what Robert did, doesn't it? The sad truth is that while students and teachers knew about this violent work, nobody talked to Robert about it to see if there was more to it than just an active imagination. Investigators revealed that most of Robert's entertainment choices were laden with violence. He was a fan of violent computer games like Counter-Strike, a first-person shooter game, and the death metal music group Slipknot. Robert also regularly read violent comic books and watched horror movies. Police officers found numerous articles on his computer about the Columbine killings. Perhaps he found his inspiration in American teen killers Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. The shooting occurred 6 days after the 3rd anniversary of the Columbine attacks. Before the murders, Robert had taken the German equivalent of the American SAT test, which he had flunked. Using a forged doctor's note, he avoided retaking the test and was subsequently expelled from school. This punishment proved to be too much for him to handle and pushed him to want to commit suicide. Instead of just killing himself, he decided to go out in a blaze of glory, the American teen killer way, in his mind, and take innocent lives with him. This German school shooting manifested all the trappings of an American school shooting. A mother of one of the students remarked, "We've been Americanized." I think it's very ironic that the deadliest school shooting occurred just hours after the German parliament approved a new bill tightening the country's already strict gun control laws. Another German teen killer, 18-year-old Sebastian Boss, stormed into the schoolyard of his former high school in Emsdetten in 2006 and opened fire. He shot 5 people, but all miraculously survived. Police found Sebastian dead on the 2nd floor of the school with pipe bombs strapped to his body. Known as a misfit who was obsessed with violence, Sebastian had previously talked about his desire to commit suicide. On his website, he also made public his desire to seek revenge on everyone who had wronged him. He wrote, "This revenge will be carried out so brutally and without quarter that the blood will freeze in your veins." Canada. Our neighbor to the north has experienced its share of some pretty heinous crimes committed by teenagers. While many of the cases are recent, teen violence in Canada did not erupt overnight. On May 28, 1975, 16-year-old Michael Slobodian opened fire on his classmates at Brampton Centennial Secondary School in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. Michael killed a fellow classmate and an English teacher and wounded 13 others. He then committed suicide in one of the school's bathrooms. Another early school shooting happened on October 21, 1975, when 18-year-old Robert Poland opened fire with a shotgun on his class at the St. Pius X High School in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He killed 1 person and wounded 5 others. Following the pattern of many killers, Robert ended his act of rage by turning the gun on himself. Robert, who has been written about in the book Rape of a Normal Mind, was not a first-time offender. Before this shooting, he had raped and stabbed his 17-year-old girlfriend. On August 16, 1991, 15-year-old Gavin Mandan of Alberta, Canada, used a .22 caliber rifle to shoot to death several members of his family, including his mother, Susan, his stepfather, Maurice, and 2 younger sisters, 12-year-old Islay and 10-year-old Janelle. All 4 victims were shot at close range. After slaying his family, Gavin discarded the corpses in a brushy area behind their home. He said he committed the crime because he hated doing household chores, and that he despised his mother and stepfather because they bugged him. Gavin was quoted as saying that he was perfectly justified in his actions. Charged and convicted, he is currently serving a life sentence in prison. 18-year-old James Bridson began his brutal rampage in May 1993 by abducting 13-year-old Megan McConnell in Manitoba. He then shot the little girl's mother and brother dead and also injured a 15-year-old teenage girl named Shannon. Megan lived. The murderous acts mirrored a movie that had recently aired on television, Murder in the Heartland, which detailed the biography of famed spree killer Charles Starkweather. It featured actors Randy Quaid and Brian Dennehy and was nominated for multiple Emmy Awards. Investigators drew a connection between James's crime and the movie. In January 1994, a 13-year-old boy from Whitehead, Nova Scotia, rang the doorbell of his neighbor's home and shot the married couple who opened the front door. The man was killed instantly, and his wife was paralyzed. Though the teen killer shot them at random, his actions were fueled by his anger toward his father for refusing to buy him chewing tobacco. 3 teenagers, ages 13, 14, and 15, from Montreal killed an Anglican priest, Frank Troop, and his wife Jocelyn in 1995. Both victims were 75 years old and were found bludgeoned to death with a baseball bat in their home. The killers were motivated by the thrill of the crime. In Saskatchewan in 1996, 14-year-old Sandy Charles murdered a 7-year-old boy. Sandy said he was fascinated with the horror movie Warlock and its sequel, and watched the film 10 times before he killed and mutilated the little boy. The fatal injuries found on the child victim replicated those of a murder victim in the movie. Leroy Lynn, 18, received a life sentence in Saskatchewan in May 1997 for killing Diane McLaren and Sandra Wiesen. During the trial, prosecutors asserted that Leroy not only bragged about the crime, but told others that he was a natural-born killer. It is believed that this teen killer was mimicking the behavior of Woody Harrelson's character from the movie Natural Born Killers. A recent case that stunned authorities involved a 12-year-old girl by the name of Jasmine Richardson from Medicine Hat, Alberta. On April 23, 2006, Jasmine and her 23-year-old boyfriend, Jeremy, killed Jasmine's father, her mother, and her 8-year-old brother. Because she was so young, Jasmine was only sentenced to 10 years, the maximum penalty according to Canadian law. She became the youngest person ever charged with multiple killings in Canadian history. On various websites, this young teen killer had included in her profile a description of herself as bisexual, Wiccan, nocturnal, insane, and a deep thinker. She listed her interests as poetry, criminal psychology, blood, human anatomy, and kinky shit. Both Jasmine and Jeremy were heavily involved in the Gothic lifestyle and adorned their web pages with corresponding dark themes, verbiage, and symbols. United Kingdom. On June 23, 1973, 13-year-old Peter Dinsdale from Hull, England, killed 6-year-old Richard Elrington by burning him to death in his own bed. Peter, nicknamed the Holocaust Man, then went on to terrorize northern Britain for the next 6 years, killing 25 people during that time frame. Included among his victims were 2 babies, elderly women, and numerous children. A pyromaniac and arsonist, he used fire in many of the crimes. In one fire he set in a retirement home, 11 people were killed. Peter was epileptic and slightly deformed. He had his name legally changed to Bruce Lee, in honor of his kung fu hero. At the time of the murders, he was living in a Salvation Army homeless shelter. Peter came from a very unstable family. His mother was a prostitute. He made the following statement after his crime spree. "I've done well to become that famous, haven't I, considering my background?" Peter was sentenced to life in a prison for the criminally insane. In January 1999, after watching the movie Scream, two 13-year-old boys from London stabbed a mutual friend 11 times in the head and left him to die. The victim, who survived but sustained permanent brain damage and partial paralysis, was found 40 hours later. He was partially hidden in a garbage can liner in the woods. Lucky to be alive, the boy told investigators that he had heard his attackers discussing where best to stab someone, and immediately afterward felt one of the disturbed boys ramming a knife into his head. France. In Paris in early 1995, a 19-year-old female and her 22-year-old boyfriend stole a few guns from French police and hijacked a taxi. They put a gun to the taxi driver's head and went on a joyride until the taxi driver drove into a police car on purpose. After the crash, the couple killed the taxi driver and two police officers while screaming lines from the movie Natural Born Killers at each other. They fled the scene and were chased by a third policeman on a motorcycle, whom they later shot and killed. A second shootout with police occurred, and the fired shots managed to hit the boyfriend, who was instantly killed. The female teen was charged and convicted of killing 5 people. In March 2000, a 16-year-old Parisian teen stabbed his father and stepmother to death the day after the movie Scream 3 was released in movie theaters. He wore the same mask as the one sported by the main character. French media reported that another teen was arrested following the release of the same movie. This young man was found near a suburban train, carrying a kitchen knife and dressed as the Scream killer. Brazil. On March 7, 2000, a 9-year-old boy in Sao Paulo, Brazil, stabbed a neighborhood girl 3 days after he watched the horror film Child's Play 2. He used 3 serrated knives as his weapons of choice. The little girl miraculously survived because the attempted killer was small and didn't have enough physical strength to plunge the knife into her body hard enough, according to crime scene inspector Susana Machado. Miss Machado reported, "I've never seen a child attack another with such violence." Japan. A 12-year-old boy from Nagasaki, Japan, kidnapped, molested, and killed a 4-year-old child in July 2003. That same month, a 14-year-old teen from Okinawa beat a fellow 13-year-old child to death. On February 14, 2005, a 17-year-old in Osaka, Japan, stabbed a teacher to death and seriously wounded 2 others at his former elementary school. After he slashed his victims, he took a break and stood in the teacher's lounge, smoking a cigarette, with the bloody knife still in his hand. His choice of weapon is commonly used in Japan for gutting fish. Other recent teen offenders in Japan include a previously well-behaved 15-year-old who stabbed a neighboring family of 6, killing 3, after he was accused of being a peeping Tom. A 17-year-old boy who hijacked a bus in southwestern Japan, fatally stabbing a 60-year-old woman with a 16-inch knife and injuring 5 others. A 17-year-old student who stabbed to death a 65-year-old woman because he wanted to experience killing someone. According to Pulitzer-nominated author Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, the number of murders by juveniles in Japan doubled from 1998 to 1999. Japan's former Chief Cabinet Secretary, Kanizo Muraoka, told Reuters in a 1998 interview, "I think the younger generation lacks the basic ethical sense of the importance of life and the difference between good and bad." He stated his opinion after a 14-year-old boy chopped off and mutilated the head of an 11-year-old child in 1998. This case prompted Japanese lawmakers to lower the age of criminal responsibility and accountability from 16 to 14. Also, it seems that the weapon of choice for many Japanese teen killers is the so-called butterfly knife, which is said to have become popular after a weekly television series portrayed teen celebrity Takuya Kimura using the knife. South America. On September 28, 2004, a 15-year-old high school student in southern Argentina opened fire in a classroom. He killed 4 classmates and wounded 5 others in the country's worst school rampage in history. The young man began the brutal attacks in silence, simply shooting with a 9mm handgun into a classroom as students cowered underneath their desks. The killer was arrested in the schoolyard and is facing a lengthy prison sentence. Russia. Dragislav Petkovic, a 17-year-old who lived in the small impoverished town of Lasenica, shot 2 teachers, killing one of them, on April 29, 2002. Dragislav then committed suicide. Witnesses said the teen killer approached one of the teachers in the schoolyard and asked him for another chance to improve his grade. He ended up killing the teacher with a handgun. He then rushed into the school building and burst into a classroom where his 50-year-old math instructor was teaching. Though he shot her in the neck, she survived the shooting. Seconds later, the 11th grader put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger in front of 30 terrified students. In the Siberian town of Talminka, a 13-year-old schoolboy was outraged after his parents beat him for getting bad grades at school. He felt he had to retaliate. In the early morning hours the following day, the teen killer took his father's double-barreled shotgun, crept into his parents' bedroom, and shot and killed them while they slept in bed. He originally intended to throw their bodies into a river, but he couldn't start the car he would have needed to transport the corpses. Instead, the 13-year-old placed the bodies in a closet, where his sister discovered them the next day. The boy was quoted as saying, "My father never used to punish me for school marks. This time he turned into a brute." Turkey. 16-year-old Ogun Samist shot and killed an Armenian journalist in January 2007 because he didn't agree with the journalist's views on the genocide of Armenians by Turks in the early 20th century. Ogun's father, who was riding a bus home from Istanbul that day, noticed his son's picture on television as someone wanted for murder. He had no choice but to turn his boy over to authorities. When he was arrested, Ogun confessed to the crime. The teen is awaiting trial at the time of this writing. New Zealand. In Auckland, New Zealand, a 15-year-old boy was arrested for the murder of a 77-year-old woman. The woman had been stabbed numerous times, and some of the wounds had pierced her vital organs. The police considered the violent and bloody scene among the worst they had seen. Namibia. 2 childhood friends raped and murdered a female friend of theirs in Namibia on December 26, 1998. Intoxicated, the boys committed what has been referenced as one of the most savage crimes in recent Namibian history. The boys, ages 15 and 16, raped their victim, slit her throat with a broken bottle, stabbed her in the chest with the same bottle, and mutilated her breast. They completed the massacre by dropping a 40-pound rock on her head. Both boys came from unstable, broken homes. When describing their motive, the older of the 2 teens explained that the murder was actually not my intention, and I was under the influence of liquor. Denmark. In November 2003, a 14-year-old Danish girl stabbed to death her 18-year-old brother and their father. The teen girl had psychological problems and loved to watch horror movies. Her brother was sleeping in his bedroom when the teen attacked him, stabbing him with a bread knife. When their father heard the commotion in his son's bedroom, he threw open the door and found his daughter stabbing her brother to death. Wearing coveralls and a Halloween mask, The young lady then turned on her father and stabbed him repeatedly in the arms and head. She took off immediately in the family car, and police apprehended her after a brief car chase. It was reported that the girl was very interested in the occult and, according to her friends, had watched Halloween almost daily. Because of her age, she was not prosecuted, but was sent instead to a mental hospital. Australia. On June 18, 2006, two 17-year-old girls in Sydney, Australia, murdered a 15-year-old girl by strangling her to death. The three girls were having a sleepover when one girl began to strangle the victim with a wire from an audio speaker. The other girl held a chemical-soaked cloth over the victim's face at the same time. They disposed of her corpse in a shallow grave under a house. The female teen killers told police that they knew it was wrong to kill, but it felt right. They expressed no remorse for the murders. Prosecutors recounted, they planned the murder with calmness, consideration, emotional detachment, and the desire to have the experience of killing someone. It's obvious that other countries besides the United States have to deal with the overwhelming issue of teen murder and violence. Unfortunately, many international murders are influenced by our violent, death-infused American media culture. We know the horrifying effect entertainment has on our own teenagers. The more we sell our poisonous culture to other countries, the more violence we will be spreading. Youth violence is a global concern that needs to be addressed on an international level before it's too late. 12. Raising a killer in 10 easy steps. It's easy now to see the signs. How a video game joystick turned Eric Harris into a better marksman. How Dylan Klebold's violent essays for English class were like skywriting his intent. If only the parents had looked in the middle drawer of Harris's desk, they would have found the 4 wind-up clocks that he later used as timing devices. Check the duffel bag in the closet. The pipe bombs are inside. The problem is that until April 20th, nobody was looking, and Harris and Klebold knew it. Nancy Gibbs and Timothy Roche. The Columbine Tapes. Time, December 12, 1999. American psychologist and television personality Dr. Phil had this to say about the problematic mindset of today's parents. They're, parents, intimidated. Life is moving so fast and there's so much competition for influencing their children that they're a little taken aback by it. Parents aren't the only influence in their kids' lives, so they need to be the best, the loudest, the clearest, and the closest. It would be easy to tell you what not to do to avoid raising a violent child or would-be criminal or murderer. Instead, I decided to reverse the approach and advise on what you should do if you want your son or daughter to grow up to be a teen killer. I understand there is no humor in homicide, but my aim is for you to see reality through absurdity and to realize that making the right or wrong choices in parenthood do make a difference. If you are not a parent, this chapter will help guide you in noticing suspicious behavioral patterns in potentially violent teens. We are all responsible to create a better future, and part of that means paying attention to and investing in the younger generation. Our future and our world are at stake. In my opinion, the following 10 steps are the best way to point your children in the direction of drug and alcohol abuse, prostitution, murder, robbery, burglary, and assaults. You know, the basic life of crime. Whatever you do, do not take this list lightly. These are the most common mistakes parents and guardians make with their children. Do you want to spend the rest of your life communicating with your own flesh and blood through snail mail and by visits to state facilities? If you do, follow the advice in this chapter. So, how do you raise a killer in 10 easy steps? Step 1. Provide an unstable environment. Here are some ideas. Create a broken home from a nasty and unnecessary divorce. You might consider bringing into your home boyfriends or girlfriends who are hostile or simply do not like your kids. You may even want to remarry a couple of times and subject your kids to numerous different moms and dads and a menagerie of step-siblings. As a parent, you can up the ante and sexually, physically, emotionally, mentally, or verbally abuse your child, or surround him with other family members or friends who could do it for you. Another way to maintain a shaky home life is to have your child witness domestic violence. Be sure to pick a spouse or a boyfriend who likes to push you around or beat you up. Instability can also be created outside of the family and home. Allowing your children to hang around peers who are bad influences is a guaranteed means for them to slide down the rocky slope of crime. Be sure to turn a blind eye and let your kids hang out with whoever, whenever, wherever. The most important thing is not to be an active, positive influence in where they go or whom they choose to call their friends. Bullying is a leading cause of teen murder, and particularly school shootings, so the best way to ensure your child is negatively affected by its influence is to allow bullies to flourish at local schools, at extracurricular events, and even on school buses. Maintain a lax policy when it comes to bullying, and engage the mindset that all kids are bullied. It's just a gateway to growing up. If your child is a bully, pat him on the back and congratulate him. If your child is being bullied, just tell him or her to stop whining and buck up. Step 2. Provide them with freedom to abuse drugs and alcohol. Situate your kids in an environment where they are exposed to dangerous substances like drugs and alcohol. These substances, along with mind-altering medication, will almost assure your child will somehow, someday, in some way, get involved in violent crime, not to mention be bound by the harrowing monster of addiction. Many of the teen killers I meet say they would not have committed the unspeakable violence they carried out if it hadn't been for the conscience-searing, mind-numbing chemicals they ingested. These are the same kinds of drugs that are on the streets today and are available to every child, including your own. They are designed to make a person think less clearly and act without reason, and they can cause great medical and physical harm. Illicit drugs also have a knack for magnifying the current negative problems your teens may be experiencing at school or at home. If you want your kids to start abusing drugs, you must continue with the first step in providing an unstable habitat and especially permitting them to befriend a peer who uses narcotics or alcohol. Forget about encouraging them to participate in extracurricular activities like sports or music. Give them the gift of freedom to smoke up, shoot up, or get wasted. This way they will have no accountability in their lives. Another great idea is to pump your kids full of dangerous prescription medication in the hopes that these pills can substitute for good parenting. Why delve deeper into their psyche or invest more time and energy in being a better mom or dad when you can just give them more pills? Forget about spending quality time with or enjoying the company of your children. Medicate them. Finally, lead by example. Be sure your kids see you abuse drugs and alcohol. They will feel encouraged to follow in your footsteps. Remember, negative or even absent role modeling is the safest way for your kids to learn and live out these bad behaviors. Step 3. Provide your kids regular access to violent entertainment. Introducing your kids to violence like rape, sodomy, murder, pornography, graphic sex, and drug use is most effective if they can see it with their own eyes on a television or movie screen, listen to it on their iPods, or even manipulate video game characters to pretend to act out violence. Although children may accidentally stumble across these negative influencers at a young age, if they have zero accountability and no boundaries in the home, they will acquaint themselves with violence at a much quicker rate. Young people have a way of visualizing violent entertainment as reality because their brains are not yet fully developed. Even intelligent kids have been known to take entertainment much more seriously than it was created to be. Eric Harris, one of the sick masterminds behind the Columbine massacre, is one such example. When he wrote about his killing spree in his journal, Eric combined his favorite video games with real events, believing the two were connected with reality. It'll be like the LA riots, the Oklahoma bombing, World War II, Vietnam, Duke, violent video game, and Doom, violent video game, all mixed together. I want to leave a lasting impression. Perhaps you don't think of television as a negative influence. Think again. How many school shootings have you heard of that were committed by kids in the Amish community, for example, or any other group of people who shuns this form of entertainment? Even further, how many teenagers with near zero access to violent entertainment in general have committed murder? There are none on record. So just tell your kids they can watch whatever they want on TV. You may consider upgrading your cable or satellite package to include adult channels to maximize the amount of violence and obscenity available in the home. If your child attends a movie theater, don't monitor what movies they see. Who cares if they tell you they are going to see Shrek when they can sneak into the theater showing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Kids are just naturally rebellious, right? They are going to do whatever they want anyway. Refrain from policing their internet activity at the home, or the DVDs they watch in their room with their friends, or the video games they stockpile in the basement. The more violence, bloodshed, murder, rape, and obscenity your kids consume, the better chance they have at acting out the violence in real life, possibly even on you or your family. Here's another nifty suggestion. As you remain clueless about the violent entertainment purchases your children make, why not make the purchases yourself? Gore porn is great as a birthday gift, as a stocking stuffer for Christmas, or even as a basket filler for Easter. Step 4. Do not provide spiritual guidance and discipline for your children. There was a day when America was a God-fearing nation, and kids in school celebrated Christian holidays. They didn't have winter break, they had Christmas break. They didn't have spring break, they had Easter break. They were allowed to publicly pray in school and practice their religious beliefs. Our country was founded on God and inspired by moral principles. But things have sure changed since then. If you want your kids to spend the rest of their lives behind bars, you must not teach them any spiritual disciplines. As a matter of fact, they must not be involved in anything spiritual, so their minds can be wide open to other beliefs that radiate hate, violence, murder, and perversion. I like to encourage you, once again, to begin this habit by laying the groundwork for a spiritually devoid home. Skip church on Sunday and watch television with your family instead. Better yet, you should go to work and leave your family at home to entertain themselves. If you are feeling guilty, you may consider sending your kids to church by themselves. This will create in them a sense of anger and resentment toward church, God, and of course, you. Be sure to interject your feeling and opinions about controversial subjects concerning religion. Support organizations like the ACLU and others who oppose religious principles and promote anti-God and anti-moral philosophies. Write to your local and state politicians about abolishing the freedom to publicly pray in schools, and if you are feeling a bit ambitious, advocate the removal of the word God from public speech. Discipline? Who needs discipline? Give your children the license to run free. Ensure they have no boundaries and definitely no consequences for any unscrupulous conduct. If you are effective, your children will start to dominate your household. Provide a lack of discipline from the time they are born so that when they are teenagers it will be nearly impossible to control them. Eventually, they will not have any respect for you or other figures of authority. Last, don't be alarmed if your kids start to experiment with dark religions or sects, like satanic cults, gangs, violent music fan clubs, or various hate groups. Kids without proper and loving spiritual guidance or discipline are easy prey for these various groups whose only desire is to manipulate and steal their minds, bodies, money, and souls. If you ignore your children for the most part, there is a really good chance they will meet someone who appears to love them more than you. This person can lead them to live a life of hate, depression, anger, and fear. Offer them plenty of privacy and freedom to establish deep and meaningful relationships with cult or gang members. The deeper they sink into these groups, the more difficult it will be to throw them a lifeline down the road and save them from inevitable destruction. Step 5. Don't worry about your kids' anger, depression, or mental illness. They will outgrow it. If you feel your child might have anger problems or suffer from depression or some type of mental illness, the best thing to do is nothing. Close your eyes and pretend that they are just being normal teenagers who will outgrow this troubling phase. Offering medical and psychiatric treatment or counseling will only prevent these problems from worsening. It may also stop them from experiencing homicidal fantasies. If you persist in ignoring their problems, it won't be long before they are pushed over the edge. They will feel like there are no other options left to fix their internal turmoil except to kill. Many teen killers I have talked to share this sentiment. Another suggestion is to have a doctor or psychologist pump them full of mind-altering prescriptive drugs, especially those with warning signs or black boxes about possible side effects like depression, suicide, and homicide. Don't forget that drugs are a great alternative to good parenting. Step 6. Ignore the warning signs of a violent teen. All sarcasm aside, let me first address common warning signs to observe in a possibly violent or murderous teen. Keep in mind that identifying these red flags can be tricky and sometimes even misleading. Some teens may exhibit a few of these signs and will never kill. Others may have no outward hints of violence, but will end up gunning down innocent people. While warning signs can manifest themselves in many ways, below are general indicators of a troubled teen. Making a statement or direct threat about harming or killing others. Being fascinated with weapons. Owning guns, knives, or other weapons. Having one or all of the homicidal triad. Coming from a violent family. Having a history of mental illness. Having verbal thoughts and conversations about death, murder, suicide, violence, and other dark concepts. Spending excessive time watching or listening to violent entertainment. Keeping a journal, a web page, or other art forms filled with violent writings. Being bullied and mistreated by others, especially at school. Running away on numerous occasions. Carrying out petty crimes, including vandalism and robbery. Suffering from anger problems or depression. Preferring to be isolated from family members and friends and avoiding social activities. Not participating in any structured activity like sports, volunteer work, or youth group. Now that we have some point of reference as to what to look out for, if you want to raise a teen killer, ignore these signs. If you are a teacher and notice that little Johnny draws violent and bloody cartoons of people getting killed, just shrug your shoulders and move on to little Tina's picture of rainbows and butterflies. After all, violent drawings and death-filled art projects are supposed to be creative outlets for children, nothing more. If you are a fellow student and hear someone talk about killing others at school, shut your mouth and keep walking to gym class. The principle of brushing off any abnormal changes, mood shifts, or violent behavior also applies to the home. Don't all teens, as they enter the growing years, change their hair color, style of dress, and opinions 100 times a day? Don't all emotionally healthy kids dress in black and listen to Insane Clown Posse 24 hours a day? And what about that verbal threat your son just screamed? All kids say they want to kill their parents, right? After all, your child would never intentionally act on it. Your child is different. Johnny is a good boy. As you magically wish away any alarming behavior your child is exhibiting, definitely do not talk to anyone about it. Friends, clergy, police, psychologists, what can they do? Nothing, really. Nobody needs to know what goes on within the four walls of your home. It's private, and it's your business. Shh! Don't talk or even think about your child's secret stash of knives and guns. Teen killers don't come from towns like yours. Gangbangers and homicidal maniacs only come from the big scary cities like Los Angeles or New York. They certainly don't come from quiet, rural, or even upscale towns like Jonesboro, Arkansas, Paducah, Kentucky, Littleton, Colorado, or Pearl, Mississippi. Step 7. Don't spend time with your children. Remember the old days when families went on vacation together, ate dinner together, and went to church together? I'm pretty sure some of you are rolling your eyes reading this. Let's get real, right? Those days are long gone. Kids do not want to spend quality time with their parents. They would rather have freedom, space, and time alone. So keep working and spending long hours at the office. Keep skipping dinner. Keep forgetting about your daughter's basketball games. Blow off your son's soccer games another year. When weekends come, even if you are physically home, it is definitely much easier to throw a wad of bills at your kids' feet and tell them to entertain themselves. Besides, don't you need some peace and quiet? Kids are just annoying energy zappers anyway. You need to take a nap, not spend quality time with them. Remember that the best and cheapest babysitter is the television. Actually, when I think about it, TV is the best parent or guardian replacement. Finally, if you happen to go on vacation without your kids, consider letting them stay unsupervised at home or at a friend's house with parents whom you've never met. These are some great paths to provide a way for your kids to bond with others and experiment with drugs or alcohol. They really need the opportunity to do things you would rather pretend they don't do. Step 8. Allow your kids full access to your weapons and make no effort to lock them up. This is directed to you, Mr. or Mrs. Gun Owner. If you want your kids to kill, they need to secure weapons, right? Well, if you've got a gun at home, this is pretty easy stuff. Fall into the mental trap that your kids already know about guns, and especially how dangerous they are. I'm sure adolescents have a deep respect for these weapons, and their curiosity will never get the best of them. After all, your kids grew up with guns in the house. Your son used to go hunting with you all the time. I'm sure that in all likelihood, they'll just ignore the gun you have propped up against the wall in your closet, hidden in your sock drawer, or just placed under your bed. In fact, if you want to do this right, I have the best idea for storing your weapons. Purchase a pretty gun cabinet, the kind with the cool carvings in the wood of jumping deer and flying mallards. Place all of your dangerous killing tools behind the most secure material known to man, a thin sheet of glass. Don't forget to keep that bottom drawer unlocked. You know how much of a hassle it is to look for a key when you want to get your ammunition out of your cabinet. By the way, keeping a gun fully loaded is another great idea. In case you decide to unload your weapon, be sure your children know where you store the ammunition, so they don't have to spend their allowance on things like shotgun shells and hollow point bullets. Best of all, do what Kip Kinkle's parents did. Reward your kids by buying them their own weapons. I'm sure you trust your teenage son or daughter, so just go for it. Go on, be a considerate and cool parent and buy them their own weapons. They make great graduation gifts. Step 9. Continue to live in a dangerous neighborhood so your kids will fall into a lifestyle of crime. I know many kids who have grown up in impoverished communities laden with violence, drugs, and gangs, and have somehow found their way to end up as productive, law-abiding citizens. Unfortunately, statistically speaking, the chances are pretty slim. Most experts conclude that a child raised in such a brutal environment will likely take up that same lifestyle. The prison population proves this point. I speak to many men and women who grew up in horrific neighborhoods. They have told me that though they knew their parents loved them, they were basically left with few options for a bright future. The one choice that was pretty much guaranteed, however, was a life of crime. If you live in a crime-infested, gang-ridden neighborhood, stay there. Just say your prayers and hope for the best. Believe what others say, and accept that this is the card you were dealt, and all you can do is learn how to survive. I know if you really wanted to, you could somehow find a way to escape the neighborhood, but it's probably too hard to even try. Besides, you grew up there, and you ended up somewhat okay. Who knows? Maybe your children will grow up and move into a safer neighborhood. Certainly their future is not your responsibility. You are just there to make sure they have a place to sleep and some kind of food to eat. Step 10. Never tell your kids you love them. Showing affection toward your kids is so antiquated, isn't it? I mean, it's not like any of our families look or act like the Cleavers or the Brady Bunch. If you are a father, well, we all know that men who give hugs or offer words of encouragement are sissies. Under no circumstances should you hug, kiss, or tell your children how much you love them or how proud of them you are. Do not model the true definition of unconditional love in the home. Your kids need to grow up with a distorted and unhealthy perspective of love and family. Forget about positive reinforcement. Pay attention only to the bad stuff they do, and discipline them in the worst sort of way for their mistakes. Don't worry, they will quickly get the point that they will never be able to please you, and so they might as well stop trying. Threaten them, hit them, beat them, scream at them, embarrass them, and degrade them. But whatever you do, never tell them you love them. I may seem acerbic to some degree, but I feel so passionate about how we need to raise our kids. My message is one of love and hope, and the steps in this chapter are not to be taken literally. But they should rattle some cages and wake you up to the reality of how some of our kids, who will develop violent tendencies, are being raised. I think that we, as parents, teachers, and community leaders, need to do our part in raising healthy, loved, and balanced children who live in safe surroundings with people who truly care for them and their futures. Every decision you make, particularly as a parent, does affect the lives of your children. It matters how you treat them. It makes a difference how you conduct your personal affairs. As it concerns parenting, I think it's very important to wisely pick our battles and let the small stuff really stay the small stuff. On a personal note, I do have the tendency to be a bit of a perfectionist, and I realize that can really stress kids out. I constantly have to remind myself to focus on the critical issues and let the minor ones go. I hope and pray that the information in this chapter has been helpful to you. Please work with me to do our best to eliminate the causes of teen murder. As members of society, we are all responsible for keeping our world as safe as possible. This starts first and foremost in the home. We must provide joy-filled, healthy, safe, and loving environments for our children that catapult them into successful lives as they grow older. If we take this matter seriously, a lot of good can be accomplished. For help in parenting and other related issues, please refer to the resource section at the end of this book, titled Phil Chalmers Recommends. Note from the author. If you read this chapter without paying attention to the first few paragraphs, please note that the sarcastic overtones were made on purpose. Refer to the beginning of the chapter for a detailed explanation. Conclusion. Keeping your family, your community, and yourself safe. Here are some practices that you can put into place to assure the safety of you and your family. Implement these guidelines and teach them to your children to decrease your chances and theirs of becoming another victim statistic of violent crime. General tips. When you are out and about, whether shopping, going for a jog, or running errands, be highly conscious of your surroundings. Never take shortcuts that would put you in isolated areas. Stay in populated areas. As you know, I'm a big believer in carrying protection of some kind. For a teenager, this could mean carrying a cell phone and possibly a can of high-powered pepper spray. For adults, many states now allow you to carry a concealed weapon, which I highly recommend. Acquiring a concealed carry permit is easy and worth the time and financial expense. If you choose this route of protection, spend plenty of time shooting your weapon at a gun range and become highly knowledgeable of the ins and outs of guns. There is a lot to learn about handguns and the dangers of carrying a lethal weapon. You must also keep in mind that the weapons you own could be used against you if you are unfamiliar with them and are not trained to use them properly and safely. Especially for young people. The first thing I tell young people is to never get into a stranger's car and never approach a random vehicle, no matter how the driver might be luring you. Keep at a safe distance in the event that you have to run away and get help. If someone is trying to kidnap you, never comply and willfully enter his vehicle. Do whatever you can to run away and fight, and do not initially comply with his demands. Even if he tells you he will not hurt you, chances are you will be hurt, possibly raped and tortured, and most likely killed. Never hitchhike or become involved in prostitution. Hitchhikers and prostitutes are common targets for serial killers and sexual predators, and they are the easiest type of murder victims. For teens especially, never go somewhere without telling your parents where you are. Do not sneak out of the house at odd hours of the night. This is very dangerous behavior, and many teens are no longer alive today because they decided to sneak out of their homes and party with their friends. Do not use the internet as a channel for meeting new people. Today's predators are no longer lurking only at malls or at playgrounds. Many of them are using the internet to stalk and eventually assault, rape, and even kill their prey. Websites like MySpace, Facebook, and other such chat rooms should be used primarily to continue the friendships and relationships you already have. If you meet strangers using these means, you are putting yourself in harm's way. Refrain from advertising personal information about yourself, such as your address, phone number, or even the school you attend. Putting such things out in the public domain makes it much easier for a predator to track you down. Choose your friends wisely. I would suggest being very careful about who you hang out with. Befriending even casual acquaintances who seek after trouble and violence could land you in prison for life. If you are at the scene of a crime that your friends committed, you could go to jail for just being there. Always report illegal activity to the authorities. And to you female readers, stay away from the so-called bad boys. Trust me, they are nothing but trouble. In the home. Never allow strangers to enter your house, no matter who they are. If it's a postal worker, for instance, he can always leave whatever he is dropping off by the front door. On the same note, never open your door to speak to a stranger. Consider getting a watchdog like a German Shepherd or a Rottweiler, who can be trained to protect you and your family against predators. Lock up guns or other deadly weapons in your home so children do not have access to them. For parents and guardians, do your best to provide a stable environment for your family. Stay married when you can, and keep violence and abuse away from your children. Build a loving and protective hedge around your children, and shield them from negative influences, like pornography, cults, gangs, and bad friends who will drag your children down and toward destructive behaviors and activities. Keep your kids involved in positive activities like church functions, sports, and music lessons. Use your power and authority to keep your children away from violent entertainment. Monitor what they are watching, reading, and listening to. Do not give them the freedom to purchase entertainment without your approval first. Pay attention to what is entertaining them. This must start at a young age, while they are in the early years of elementary school. If you keep violent entertainment away from them when they are young, chances are in your favor that they will not fall prey to this garbage as they get older. Teach your kids self-defense and other safety techniques, like how to be wary of suspicious or possibly violent adults and sexual predators. Most important, listen to your children and spend time with them. Most school shooters told someone what they were about to do, but the ones who received the disturbing information made the tragic mistake of not taking it seriously. Andrew Williams, the 15-year-old shooter from Santana High School, threatened for days to bring a gun to school. Michael Carneal from Paducah, Kentucky, warned people not to come to school the day of his shooting. Kids need your time and not just things, so spend as much quality time as you can with them. Reach out to children who have absent or unhealthy families. Sometimes extending a listening ear, lending wisdom, and even welcoming a child into your home or family can make a huge difference in a child's life. And it really doesn't take that much effort. When you feel children you know are at some sort of risk, or possibly being abused or molested in their homes, call the authorities right away. Keeping your school and community safe. The first thing we need to do to keep our schools and communities safe is to pull the heads of all school and community leaders out of the sand. Many of them are too naive to imagine that a violent crime or school shooting could happen in their neighborhood. I can't tell you how wrong that kind of thinking is. Pearl, Mississippi, Littleton, Colorado, Paducah, Kentucky, and Springfield, Oregon are beautiful, comfortable, safe, and virtually all-American towns. They are also suburbs that were ravaged by crazed killers living right under their noses. Please, don't make this mistake in your school and in your community. Take the approach that violence of any caliber can happen in your town and in your school. The most common sense step you can take is to learn the causes of teen murder I talked about in this book and become educated in what you can do to prevent these causal factors from occurring. Take responsibility as a citizen and report child abuse. Turn in kids who are abusing drugs, and don't allow kids to be bullied and picked on at your school. Help keep violent entertainment out of your community, and notify the local authorities about adults who are selling this perversion to children in your town. Do what you can to educate other parents in your community who are blind to these causal factors. Violence expert Lieutenant Colonel Grossman called his strategy to keep schools safe the 5 Ds. His strategy includes the following wise recommendations. Denial. Stop living in denial. Violence exists, and even the most innocent-looking kid can do something dangerous. All of us, including school officials, must understand this. Deter. Deter school killers by not having a soft target. The best defense against violent criminals is to post armed police officers or school resource officers at every school. Teen mass murderers don't want to attack a school where they will get resistance. Detect. Be alert and catch killers before they strike. Be aware of and report suspicious behavior, like threats and bragging about violence. Grossman compared school killers to terrorists and pointed out the precautions we are taking to protect our country from these enemies. Take the same precautions at your schools and community centers. Delay. Learn how to delay a school shooter. Having secured classrooms with locked doors and protective wire mesh on the windows is a good example. At the Red Lake High School shooting in Minnesota, Jeff Weiss broke into an unsecured room by busting the unsecured window and opening the door that a teacher was trying to hold shut. He killed several students and a teacher in a matter of minutes before the police arrived. At Columbine, school officials had no plan to deter potential violent offenders because no one imagined a crime of any caliber could take place in that upscale town. The teacher in the library did the best she could do with no safety plan and witnessed the execution of several of her students in the unsecured library. Columbine and Red Lake paid a huge price for not being prepared and not having a well-thought-out plan. The cost was nearly 24 innocent victims. All schools have a fire drill, but few talk about a school violence plan. What do you do when a shooting occurs? If your school has no plan or you have not practiced that plan, your head is now buried in sinking sand. All doors should be secured, and monitors should control who enters the school. Defeat. Today's police are being trained to apprehend or kill a school shooter. They will enter a school quickly and will use force if necessary. I'm sure we will never see law enforcement delay before entering a school as they did in Littleton. Think about this. In America, we are scared to death of terrorists, and we are doing whatever we can to prevent another terrorist attack. These international criminals killed 3,000 people on 9/11, but since that fateful day, teenagers have killed more than 12,000 Americans, mostly other teenagers. The killers in our nation, including our youth, are much more dangerous and deadly than foreign terrorists. We need to start protecting ourselves against ourselves. I'm not naive enough to think that a book can stop teen violence, or that teen murder will one day just stop happening. But I do believe that we, as a society, can make a world of difference, and that together we can reach many kids before they reach this violent level, the willingness to end a human life. It's time the government and our leaders begin to make the decision to help kids who need our help. And we must stand together with and assist parents who are out of options with their violent teens. Let's start spending our dollars now and get these troubled kids the help they need, or we will instead be spending our money to apprehend and incarcerate teens for 50 years or more, which is what we are currently doing. Stand with me. Together we can make a difference. Together we can get these kids help before they ruin their lives, the lives of their families, and the lives of their victims' families. We need to do our part to save innocent human beings and make our country and our world a better place. It's the least we can do. I'd love to hear your thoughts, suggestions, questions, and comments. You can personally communicate with me by logging onto my website, www.philchalmers.com. There are also additional resources and more information for further study. I look forward to working with you to eliminate the problem of teen violence.
You've been listening to the audio production of Inside the Mind of a Teen Killer. Text copyright 2009 by Phil Chalmers. Production copyright 2023 by Thomas Nelson. No portion of this recording may be reproduced without the prior written consent of the publisher. For more information on other books and audio products from Thomas Nelson, please visit your favorite retailer or visit us online at thomasnelson.com. This audiobook was recorded at Kingswood Productions in Nashville, Tennessee.